So today's first question is cremation okay versus burial? This is a great question. Not meaning that all the other questions were not great. And there, as I was researching this and looking into it, I realized there's a lot of, I was going to say there's a lot of opinions on this, but essentially there's two opinions, but people are very, very opinionated about it. Either yes, it's okay, or no, it's not okay. But you see different, people get really, they have a strong opinion about it one way or the other, for the most part, it seems. So today I want to look at this question: is cremation okay versus burial? I want to give you some arguments for why what people say that it's not okay, and then show you the arguments that I could find of why people say it is okay, or ones that I thought of, and I'll share my opinion about it, and you are free to make your own decision yourself, using the Word of God and following the Holy Spirit. And this question, it's kind of, in some ways it could feel like, well, what does it really matter? Because when I'm dead, I don't really get to have an opinion on what happens to me. But it could seem like, well, this question doesn't really matter until someone dies, or you attend a funeral and it's done in a way where you're like, I don't know if that's okay. And then suddenly you're forced to deal with this. Like, is it okay? Is it not okay? What does the Bible say? So I've never been in the position yet of having to decide whether me or someone else would be buried or cremated. Nope, never been in that position, not yet. But someday I probably will be. And someday you all probably will be in that position. So it's a good question to look at. So, all right, reasons that people say cremation is not okay. The first one, and this is sort of a silly reason, but I'm going to put it here because I was actually told this by people in Romania, and maybe you've heard it, maybe you've thought this. Essentially, the thinking is, if you're cremated, God can't raise your body to life again at the resurrection because your body is too destroyed. And I say this is silly because is anything ever too destroyed for God to recreate? He created everything out of nothing. So, it's not a problem for God. God can do whatever he wants. And a couple of responses that come to my mind about this right off the bat is, if cremation is too hard for God because the body has been turned to ash, what about all the godly people who died by fire? In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church would take supposed heretics and burn them at the stake as a way to guarantee, and they're thinking that they wouldn't be able to rise up again. Not only are we going to kill you, we're going to burn you so that you'll die, and then you can't have a new body. But what about all these godly men that were burned at the stake? John Huss, William Tyndale, too, I believe, was burned at the stake. So is God going to be like, man, if only they had just chopped your head off, but I can't figure this one out. It's too tricky for me. What about, we all know the stories of Nero, where Nero would light his dinner parties with burning Christian lamps. You take a Christian, light him on fire, and burn him during his party. What about them? They died as martyrs for the faith, gave their lives for Jesus. And is Jesus going to go, shoot, I just can't figure it out? What about modern day Christians, where Africa and India, Muslims and Hindus are burning Christians. They're gathering around churches at times. Like Nigeria, this happens a lot. They gather around the churches, and while the Christians are inside, they light the whole church on fire, everybody burnt to a crisp, essentially cremated. What about people who just die in a house fire? It doesn't make sense to me that this would be too difficult for God. Another response that I would have to this is, what about all the deaths that are actually worse than burning and destroy the body more so than burning? I shared one example with Jessie, and she's kind of smirking about it. So back in the early years of Christianity, you had Nero lighting Christians on fire. What else is a big thing they would do to Christians to kill them? Anybody? Throw them to the lions. Okay, you get eaten by a lion. You know what happens to the things the lions eat eventually. If God has a problem with ash, certainly that would be a problem. It doesn't make any sense. Or burial at sea. I just finished a book on the Lusitania incident before World War I, and it talked about bodies that were recovered years later, and they barely looked human anymore, just drifting in the salt water and being nibbled on by fish for years. just decomposing and getting all funky looking. Like, that seems more intense than cremation to me. So, or Nagasaki, maybe you didn't know this, but as I was researching, I found out Nagasaki, where we dropped one of the atom bombs, that was a center of Christianity in Japan. Not that Christianity was really huge in Japan at the time, but Nagasaki had Christians. And so when the atom bomb was dropped and everything was incinerated, that seems worse than cremation to me. So, I don't think cremation is a problem for God. God is all powerful. So I don't think it's a matter of, is he able to do this or not? No, I throw that question out. That's silly to me. And if God can raise dead, rotted, decayed flesh back to life again, he could raise ash back to life again. Mark 13, verse 27, talking about the last days, Jesus says, "And then God will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven." So we have this promise that God is going to gather his elect. So that verse tells me, well, if the elect person, their body was turned to ash and scattered, God could gather it, because he will gather his elect. Second reason people give about why cremation is not good is pagan traditions burn their dead, so we should have nothing to do with cremation. This, I give a little more value to this complaint than the first one. So Chuck Colson in 2007 in his Breakpoint program, he actually said, Christians buried their dead. Christian teaching about Jesus' incarnation and resurrection led them to treat the human body with respect. In my research of this, I found an article by Eric Metaxas, who I agree with him on so many different things, but I completely disagreed with him on his point, his opinion of cremation versus burial. And the article is titled, "Why Cremation is Pagan and Burial is Christian." So if you're not sure what his opinion is, it's like, bam, right there. Cremation is pagan, burial is Christian. Enough said, end of the discussion, we're moving on. So there is some truth to this. You do see, like, certain pagan cultures did cremate their dead. I listed a few here. You've got Vikings made famous by Hollywood, of, putting their dead onto a boat, lighting it on fire and letting it adrift. Hindus cremated their dead, and they had a terrible tradition of wives often were burned alive with their dead husbands. The Greeks in Athens, they cremated their dead. Romans originally practiced both burial and cremation interchangeably, but by the time of Jesus, they were almost entirely cremating the dead. And many modern pagan and New Age practitioners cremate the dead. And they involve cremation with occult practices. So there is some truth to this, that there are pagan cultures that have cremated their dead. But, and I found this somewhat surprising, most pagans actually buried their dead. As I started looking into it and researching what different cultures did, it was like burial, and once in a while cremation and some other funky things and all that. But like the majority of human history, people have buried their dead, regardless of their culture. And just think about it, like it makes sense. Like, what are archaeologists doing all the time? They're digging up burial graves, tombs, burial mounds. They're constantly finding cultures that buried their dead. Many of these graves that archaeologists find, the majority of them predate the coming of Christians or Jews into their area. So unrelated to the Old Testament or the New Testament, cultures buried their dead. And it kind of makes practical sense. You have a dead body, you need to do something with it, so you put it in the ground, bury it. Ancient Babylonians buried their dead, and they actually said that it was a curse if your body wasn't buried. And it's somebody who really didn't like you, say everybody hates Uncle Joey, so you decide you're going to curse him for eternity by burning his body instead of burying it. And the ancient Hittites, they both buried and cremated their dead. The Canaanites most usually buried their dead, and there's tombs in ancient Israel, the Middle East, that you can go visit, even to this day. Most Greeks buried their dead. The Athenians cremated their dead, but most of the Greek cultures buried their dead, either in mass graves or individual graves or tombs. Even the Vikings, This surprised me. I have this picture in my head of the Vikings. Every funeral is they put them on a boat and they burn them. And what I was reading about it is that's more Hollywood than reality. Typically, they had burial mounds. Either they would dig a big grave, put the body in there and a bunch of their stuff, and then bury it and leave a big mound, or they would just put the body on the earth and cover it with stones. The Native Americans too. Wisconsin is famous for we have burial mounds everywhere. Most of the Native Americans buried their dead. The Incans buried their dead, sometimes after mummifying them. The Aztecs, this was gross. Not starting gross. Gross comes soon. The Aztecs, they cremated merchants, but they buried kings, and they buried the kings with a dead red dog so that he could ride the red dog into eternity, I guess. But poor people were buried, and oftentimes underneath the hut or the house that their family lived in so that they could be close to their departed ones. Ugh. Yeah, no, I'm not into that. So, yes, some pagans did cremation, burned the dead, but the majority buried their dead. Also, and this is maybe too much information, but there's a lot of pagan traditions besides burial and cremation. Zoroastrians and the Lakota Sioux, they would take the dead body, put it on either a tower, like a stone tower, or a wooden platform, put it up in the dry desert air, and let it dry out and let birds come and eat it and bring the pieces to heaven, is what they said. Buddhists in Mongolia and Tibet did something similar. They cut up the dead body and put it out in the mountains and let the birds eat it. Yeah, very nice, yeah. Nordic countries, many of them, one of their traditions was they would throw the dead body over a cliff, let it fall into the water, and just wash away in the sea. Egyptians mummified and then buried their dead. So, it's not quite as simple as Christians bury, pagans cremate. There's a lot of variation in it as you start to look into it. Here's another problem with that. What do we do about Israel and Joseph? So if we say, okay, some pagans cremated their dead, therefore cremation is pagan and we can't do that. Well, what's another burial funeral practice that a pagan culture did? That would be mummification. Israel and Joseph were mummified. Maybe it was sin and they shouldn't have been mummified, but they were, and so that becomes a problem. Genesis chapter 50, verse 2 says, and Joseph, remember, he's second in command. He's one of the rulers of Egypt, and so he would have been familiar with all the Egyptian practices. So, and Joseph commanded that his servants, the physicians, embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now, from what I could tell, the word embalming seems to be essentially the same as mummification. There's a whole process with mummification where the Egyptians there were occult practices with it, but they would do things with the internal organs and stuff the body with spices and all this stuff. And from what I can tell, it seems like this word embalming is essentially, it's the same thing as mummification from what I could tell, but maybe not. My thinking is probably Joseph said, all right, I don't want you to do the pagan stuff. Don't do your occult stuff. Don't do the rituals. But Joseph wanted to preserve his father's body so that he could bring it back and bury it properly one day in the promised land. And so the best way to do that would be to embalm it or mummify it or to preserve it somehow for that point. Until that point. And since Joseph is in Egypt and he has Egyptian physicians, they wouldn't do modern day embalming. They would do what the Egyptian physicians would do, which would have been mummification. Next verse, it says, 40 days are required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. That's the standard Egyptian practice, the numbers of days that they would do for the mummification process. And so I don't think... maybe Joseph allowed and commanded that they do the occult rituals as well, but I find that highly surprising that Joseph, as a man of God, would have done that. I think he said, this looks like a practical way to preserve the body, so do that, keep out the creepy prayers. But it doesn't seem like he threw it out just because it's associated with a pagan culture. And then again, with his body, the same thing was done. Genesis 50, verse 26, when he died, says, so Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Now, Joseph is a high official in the Egyptian court. What would his coffin look like? Would it look like a pine box from like an Old West film? Would it look like a modern coffin like we have, nice and shiny and stuff? It probably would look like King Tut's coffin, an Egyptian sarcophagus. Sounds really pagan to me. But I think there's a way to separate the physical procedure from the occult practice. And so that's what I think probably happened here, is that Joseph said, well, I want to preserve my body to one day be buried in the promised land. I want my dad's body to be buried in the promised land. We can't bring a rotted, dead corpse, so the best way to do it, mummify it, embalm it, so that one day we can bury the body. But the question this brings up in my mind is, well, if creation is wrong because some pagans did that, well, then I would say mummification, embalming, at least Egyptian mummification would have been wrong. So then why did Joseph and Israel do it, but God didn't seem to have a problem with that? Maybe he did have a problem with it. Maybe it was sin. That could be one way around that. But then the other question then is, that this all brings up, is if cremation is wrong because pagans did it, well, the majority of pagans buried their dead, so then is burial also wrong? Like, I don't buy this I think this is a better argument than the first one, but I still think this doesn't quite play out in the scriptures. I think you could separate the physical act from the occult practices that were associated with it at times. Third reason people give why cremation is not okay is the Bible speaks negatively about people who are burned in death. This has a lot of truth to it. Often it does show instances of people being burned in death, whether it was cremation or otherwise with fire. It shows it in a negative light many times. Here's a few quick examples. Sodom and Gomorrah. How did God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Burned with fire. You could say, well, that's pretty dang close to cremation. That's about as close as you could get. Number 16 is Korah's rebellion. Again, I just realized Korah's rebellion, they died both ways. God buried them, and then 250 other people he burned. He's like, I'll bury some of you, I'll cremate some of you, just to make everybody upset. Isaiah 33, God talks about that he will consume the wicked in his burning, fiery presence. Malachi 4:1 talks about the arrogant and evildoers will burn like stubble. John 15:6 talks about the branches that don't abide in Jesus will be thrown into the fire and burned. Hell itself is described as a lake of fire and everlasting fire. Time and again, you see God commanding and people responding by destroying articles of witchcraft and idols by burning them. There is definitely a connotation there's a negative connotation with burning things many times in the Bible. However, on the other side, there were some three famous guys that were almost burned to a crisp: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were godly men. And so I don't think you can totally say, they weren't? Oh, they weren't burned. Yeah, so then you could make that argument. Yeah, they were almost, but then they weren't. So,
They were specifically saved out of that.
They were saved out of that. Also, in the however side, God's presence is described as a burning fire. And a lot of the times where it talks about judgment and fire coming out in destruction on the wicked, in context, it's God's presence consuming them. It's so, throughout the Bible, you see, a couple weeks ago at the youth group, Daniel brought this up. He's like, or maybe it was his last week, I don't know. But he brought up, it seems like a lot of times when God shows up, he shows up as fire. And I said, well, yeah, but also as like wind, and you also have oil as a sign of, a symbol of his presence. There's all other things as well, but a lot of times his presence shows up as a consuming fire, and whoosh, that's what destroys things. So I don't think you can make a one-to-one equivalency there, that just because there's fire bringing destruction, or that means it's bad. But here, let's go through some of these scriptures that provide some evidence that maybe cremation is wrong. Amos 2:1, Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because he burned to lime the bones of the king of Edom. Now, we don't totally know what is going on in this prophecy here. So Amos is talking about a situation in which the Moab and Edom, who were historically enemies, there seems to be a situation where at some point Moab burned the dead king of Edom, burned his bones to the point where it's so burned and God is upset about that. We don't know. We don't have an instance in the scriptures where this happened. We don't have a recorded instance where this happened. We don't have an instance in history that people can point to and say, this is when that happened. But it seems like there was some situation that he's pointing to where there was animosity between the two, and Moab responded in the extreme of the theory that I heard that made the most sense of that they wanted to desecrate their enemy so bad that they dug up the king's bones and burned them until it was just gone, ashes, finished. And one rabbi said that then he took the bones and, well, basically with the reference to burning it to lime, that then he used that substance to plaster his palace. I don't know. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say that. But I think the point here, it doesn't seem to me that God is necessarily upset about the act of burning, but more about the vitriol, the hatred, the desecrating of this body. That, okay, it seems to me like he's saying, look, I get it. You're enemies and you're fighting, but did you have to do that? That man, even though he was a pagan, he was made in my image, and you just defiled his body and treated it like it was nothing. It seems like that's the issue God's upset at here. 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 20, King Josiah, he starts tearing down the pagan altars and restoring true worship in Israel. And it says, all the priests of the high places who were there, he slaughtered on the altars and burned human bones on them. Then he returned to Jerusalem. So Josiah, to defile and desecrate these pagan altars and sites of pagan worship, he does 2 things. He kills the priests, and then he burns human bones on them. I don't know if it was the priests themselves that he burned there or other human bones, but it's definitely, it's not a good thing. There's not a good connection here between burning the human bones and what's going on. Joshua 7:25, God commanded Israel to attack the city of Ai and destroy everything, leave nothing standing. But Achan kept some of the stuff for himself, and God was not happy about it. And so verse 25 says, so Joshua says, why did you bring trouble on us? Talking to Achan. The Lord brings trouble on you today. And all Israel stoned him with stones. They burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. So they killed the offenders and burn them, cremate them basically. It's almost, in my mind here, what's going on, it's almost like God is like, well, they want to remove them. And whether it's, specifically, well, it seems like they want to remove entirely this sin from their presence. So they don't want to just bury them and leave them there. They want it gone. So they burn it, finish it, let it be removed. The word burned that's used here is the same word that's used about the burnt offering in the Old Testament, where it's supposed to be left burning until there's nothing left, until it's just ashes. So the idea here, you screwed up, basically we'll cremate you because you screwed up. You sinned, you defied God, rebelled against God. Genesis 38, verse 24. So this is a nasty story. Judah sleeps around with his daughter-in-law, gets her pregnant, and because he thought she was just a prostitute, which that's no better. I mean, it's like it's all bad, Judah. Come on. And then he finds out, and he's so upset about it. It says Judah tells her, he finds out, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah doesn't realize it's because of him, not yet. And he says, bring her out and let her be burned. There was something that he found so offensive and egregious in this act that he's like, I don't want her just killed. I don't want her bury her. I want her burned, just removed from existence. In Leviticus chapter 20, verse 14, God actually speaks to a similar situation, lays down a law. He says, if a man takes a woman and her mother also and sleeps with the 2 of them, It is depravity. He and they shall be burned with fire, that there may be no depravity among you. There seems to be some connection here with the fact that this is so bad, so wrong. You don't deserve just death, that this is a violation of everything right and normal in society. So kill them, burn them, remove them from memory, from existence. Leviticus 21:9 says the same thing about a priest's daughter that's sleeping around, that she should be burned until there's nothing left. And then we have 1 Samuel 31, starting in verse 11. King Saul had died in his war with the Philistines, and then the Philistines take him, they cut off his head, strip him of his armor, and then hang his headless, naked body on the wall of Beth-shan, which Richard and I actually got to visit Beth-shan, and we saw the hill where where the city walls were, and he would have been hung there. And so they hang him on the city wall, and then later it says in verse 11, but when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul in Jabesh-Gilead, so before Saul had fallen, before Saul had totally rejected God, he rescued Jabesh-Gilead. So they have some honor and some respect for Saul. So when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So the thinking goes that Saul was a bad king. He died without honor. He lived without honor, and he died without honor. And so therefore, he didn't get an honorable funeral by being buried like the other kings, but he had this terrible, he was doomed to a terrible funeral and ultimately cremated and then buried. But a question I would bring up is, why did the men of Jabesh-Gilead burn Saul's body instead of just burying him? I think that, well, I don't think it was to desecrate it, because they risked their lives to go get his body. So they seem to have some honor or respect for him because he rescued them from the Ammonites way back before he turned evil. So I don't think they're trying to desecrate his body. I don't think they're trying to remove the memory of Saul from Israel. I think it's an act of mercy where they're trying to do the best thing to show honor to Saul and his family. The body's been hanging on a wall. It doesn't have a head. It's naked. It's sitting in this hot sun hanging on a wall. It probably looks disgusting, filthy, nasty. And they don't want, when they do the funeral, they want to honor Saul. They don't want to put out this thing where people go, yeah, he deserved that. That's my thinking here, that probably they're doing it as an act of mercy and as the best way to show honor to Saul and his memory. We don't know exactly if that's why it was done, but it makes sense to me. Regardless, Saul was a bad guy, and he didn't get an honorable funeral. He was essentially cremated. And so there is some truth to this, that the Bible does show people that are burned in death, those instances, they are not typically a good situation. There's some negative connotations around it. All right, number 4 reason that people give is we are created in God's image. Our bodies are a gift from him, so burial is the best way to honor that. This is a really good point. Before researching this question, I was basically on this extreme of saying, when my body's gone, I don't care. I'll be in heaven, and my spirit will live on with Jesus, so I don't care what someone does with my body. And I would even joke with my family and say, you guys should stuff me and sit me up in the patio. scare the Walmart delivery drivers. No, I don't really want you to do it. It'd be kind of fun, but I'm like, I'm dead and gone. Whatever, I don't care. But my opinion has slightly shifted where we really should respect and honor the fact that God created us in his image. Every person's physical body is a gift from God. And so there is some truth to this, that we want to honor that person's memory, and we want to honor the fact that God created us in his image, not that God looks just like us. But he gave us these bodies as a gift. And so we don't want to just be like, yeah, just whatever. Throw me out of a 747 as I'm flying over Germany. That'd be fun. That'd be interesting news stories. Interesting breakfast all of a sudden. Heard about a guy, a skydiver in England. His parachute didn't open up, and all of a sudden, so this British couple, this older British couple, was having their tea and crumpets one morning, and all of a sudden a body comes through their roof and boom, lands on their kitchen table. The guy was fine. He had a concussion. They bring him to the hospital. He miraculously survived. Fine. No broken bones or anything. Yeah. But he went boom, right through the whole thing. Yeah. So what's that? I don't remember. It wasn't, it was high enough that I was like, that's amazing. But he attributed it to God. The guy has a faith in God. And he's like, yeah, I think God saved me. He protected me. So maybe God did it just so he could be a testimony. But this is a good point. You don't want to. We really should honor God by treating bodies with respect, whether the body is alive or dead. Now, having said that, I don't think that burial is the only way to show a dead body respect and to honor God. I think you could do that through cremation as well. And I think you can bury a dead body in a way that doesn't honor God too. I don't want to describe those, but just read about the Indian Wars and what the Indians did to Custer's men and what the cavalry did to the Indians and stuff, and you can find out a lot of just vile ways that people treated dead bodies and then buried them. All right, and the fifth reason that I could find or think of why people give for why cremation is not okay, this is the final one. The Old Testament Jews, New Testament Christians, and early church all buried their dead. Outside of King Saul. And King Saul would be the only one I'd say is kind of a cremation, but it's not entirely a cremation because they burned him and then buried him. So is it cremation, is it burial? I don't know, maybe it's both. But yeah, this is true. For the evidence that we have in the scriptures and the early church, that's what the Jews and the Christians did. You cannot find any biblical instances of, no New Testament instances of Christians being cremated or burned. And the only one in the Old Testament of a Jew being cremated that we find is King Saul, and that's not quite the same even. So that's pretty strong. That says something there. And if you do a word search in the Bible for buried or burial, it's just wild how many things come up where you're like, so-and-so died and was buried. So-and-so died and was buried. Boom, 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 boom. That's just what they did. Abraham, I have a few listed here. Abraham purchased a burial site for himself and his wife Sarah. Joseph, mentioned already, his body was mummified and then later the bones buried. God himself, this is kind of interesting to think about. When Moses died, in Deuteronomy 34, verses 5 through 6, it says that God dug a grave and buried Moses. God could have done anything to Moses' body. He could have very easily cremated Moses' body or come up with some crazy new way to deal with his body, just disintegrate him and like zap him into heaven or something. He could have done anything. But when God chose to deal with a dead body, he said, I'm going to bury it. That's interesting there. It says a lot. John the Baptist was buried in a tomb. The rich man was buried. Lazarus, Jesus' friend, was buried. Ananias and Sapphira were struck down by God and then buried. Jesus himself was buried. The Bible emphasizes burial in caves, like Abraham and Sarah were buried in a cave. Burial in tombs. King David was buried in a tomb. Buried under the earth, like Isaac. They dug a hole and buried him in the earth. Those are the most common methods of dealing with the dead. And on the opposite side, like I mentioned, you don't have any evidence in the Bible or the early church records of Christians being buried. Not that I could find. Maybe there's some out there. Maybe somebody will find some group of Christians in the deserts of Syria were cremating the dead. Maybe someday we'll find some documents of that. But so far where it's at, it just didn't happen. Cremation was not a part of their practice. So those are the reasons why people say cremation is not okay. Now let me go on the other side, or the ones that I could find anyway, and there might be other arguments out there. Now, why do people say cremation is okay? So, number one, bodies that are buried eventually decay and look a lot like bodies that are cremated. You know, if you take a person that died a Christian in Jesus' day, after Jesus, the early church, you take their body and you bury it, it's going to look a lot like ash and dust, and it'll look very similar to a cremated body. Genesis 3:19 says here, God proclaims, "By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." However we die, eventually that's what happens. We end up, our body, our physical body ends up in the same place in the end, dust and dirt. So that's kind of a good argument there. Okay, so for practical purposes, the end result is the same, whether you cremate or are buried. Number two, God will give us a new spiritual body, not just an upgraded version of our physical body. I have never, until having to look into this question, I had never thought about this that much. I just was like, well, I don't know what's all going to happen when we get the new heavens and new earth and we resurrect. I don't know, but I know it's going to be awesome. But the reality is our new body that we get when we are resurrected, it's not just like God takes your current frumpy, achy, breaky body and he just makes it a little nicer, or like adds some wings and maybe like, I don't know, you can do like stretch like Elastigirl or something, gives you some superpowers. It will be recreated entirely new. And we have no idea, like the dimension of newness. I don't comprehend it currently, and the Bible's not super clear, but it's going to be completely different. It'll be us, but a different us. The body will be different. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 35, someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? You foolish person. See, there you go, Paul. Stop being so harsh. You idiot. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. So he's making this illustration here. You take a grain of wheat, you put it in the ground, you bury it, and what comes up is not going to look like a better version of that grain of wheat. You're not going to get like, oh, now it's like golden and shiny and it like floats around. No, you have a stalk of wheat now. You take a grain, you take a seed, you bury it. The plant that comes from that seed is totally different. And so he's kind of trying to draw this illustration that us then too, when we're dead, the new body that we have, it's not going to be just like a modified version of what we have now. It's going to be completely different. Moving on a little further, verse 42, so is it with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there's a natural body, there's also a spiritual body. We're not just getting an updated, upgraded version of what we have now. What we'll have in the future when we're resurrected is completely different. He says here that we had an imperishable. Sorry, I lost where it is in my notes. What are all the words here? You foolish. There it is. It was perishable, but our new body will be imperishable, unable to die. It was full of dishonor, but it will be full of glory. It was weak, but it'll be full of power. It was a natural body, but we'll have a spiritual body. What does a spiritual body look like? I don't know, but I know it's not what we have now. It's completely different. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, he says, now we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, that's our physical body, if this is destroyed and gone, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Our new body, our spiritual body that's full of glory, full of honor, imperishable, it's not built by human hands. It's not like what we have now. What it will be like, I don't totally know. And the Bible doesn't exactly describe piece for piece what it's going to be like, but it's not the same. just as a seed is not the same as the plant that comes from it. Number 3 reason that people give is burial is too expensive. Cremation is cheaper. So this is true, often anyway. Obviously, the counterpoint to this is, well, if God says to do it, doesn't matter what price it is. You do it because the scriptures say that, and that's what you do. Doesn't matter if it costs a lot or not. But I think this is something to consider. Why did the men of Jabesh Gilead, why did they cremate Saul's body? Because it was the most practical way to deal with it in that situation. To show honor to God, honor to Saul, honor to Saul's family, that was the practical thing to do. Why was Joseph and Israel, why were they mummified? Not because they're like, sweet, this seems fun, but I think because it was the practical way to deal with it so they could preserve the body for later burial in the promised land as an act of faith. So I think you could argue that if cremation makes practical sense, okay, then do that. There's instances where, if the body is far away in a foreign land, like missionaries that died in a foreign land, and you can't retrieve it in time, okay, have it cremated over there, bring it over here. That makes more practical sense. If the body's been disfigured, like Saul's body was through drug abuse or through violence, you don't necessarily, maybe the best way to honor it is, okay, let's cremate the body. If you can't afford a burial, then okay, this is the thing that makes practical sense. I think if it makes sense to bring honor to God, the person who died, and the family, then it's probably an okay thing to do. 4th reason people give for why cremation is okay, nowhere does the Bible call out cremation itself as sin. I think this is pretty telling. It's a pretty compelling argument that if the Bible doesn't want us to do it, it should directly deal with it and call it sin, but the Bible doesn't say that. And we know the writers of the New Testament, well, I'm pretty certain the writers of the New Testament knew about cremation because it was the most popular way to deal with the dead in the Roman world. So they had to have known about it. And to have it never talked about, never called out as sin, it's like, well, that seems like God's not that hung up on it. 1 Corinthians, the closest we get is 1 Corinthians 13:3. Where Paul says, if I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Here it seems Paul is referring to a practice that was not common in the Greco-Roman world, but it happened, where when they would cremate the body, that someone who was devoted to them and really loved them and wanted to show how devoted they were, they would offer themselves to be cremated, burned alive, along with the body. And Paul is just pointing out here how foolish that is. You don't gain anything. You just lost your life now for nothing. So I don't think he's condemning the act of burning the dead body here. He's condemning the foolishness of saying, burn me too. That doesn't prove your devotion or your love. That's just a foolish thing to do. You gain nothing for doing that. So I think it's rather telling that the Bible doesn't come out and say cremation is sin. 5th reason, nowhere does the Bible command that we bury the dead. You see it happening all throughout the scriptures, Old and New Testament, but nowhere does it say this is how you must deal with the dead body, which is odd to me because Leviticus shows you how to deal with everything. And some things where I'm like, did we really need to know about that? Apparently they did. Maybe it's not brought up because that's just how the cultures dealt with it, and God didn't need to tell them because it was what they were doing. But it's interesting that it doesn't say, there is no command that this is how it must be dealt with. Focus on the Family, an article I read on this topic, the writer wrote, we don't believe, those that focus on the family, we don't believe that cremation needs to be viewed as a spiritual issue. One could just as easily argue that the custom of burial in ancient Israel was nothing more than a reflection of the Bible's cultural context. So it is true that burial is the most common form of dealing with a dead body in the Old and New Testament and the early Christian era. It could be that this was just what the culture did. And not so much a command of God, because we don't see blatant command, a direct command from God to do it. So it could be that was just what the culture did. And so maybe a different culture would treat it differently, just like how modes of dress are different. Most likely, Jesus wore sandals. I don't know if he did or not, but I guess we do know he did. He talked about sandals. But that was their culture. If you don't wear sandals nowadays, it doesn't mean that you're not like Jesus. It's okay. It's just a cultural thing. All right, so what are my conclusions? What's that? No, clearly. That's obviously sin. Oh, man. Crocs. I'll wear Crocs when I'm painting. I guess I wear Crocs more than is culturally acceptable. I will admit that. What are my conclusions? All right, Luke chapter 9, verse 59. Jesus is calling his disciples, and they all reject him. To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Leave the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." The more important matter for us is that we preach to the living than we worry about how to deal with the dead bodies. I think the reason that there's no clear command one way or the other in the Bible is that it's not that big a deal. What we should be focused on is, how are you living? Are you living for Jesus? Are you serving him with everything you have? Are you busying yourself preaching to every living person around you? Or are you hung up going, I don't know what we do with the dead bodies? I just don't think it's that big a deal. But here are some basic guidelines that I think make some practical sense. Number one, do what makes practical sense to show respect and love to the person's memory, to their family, and to God, in whose image they are made. This was something that I got convicted on because, like I mentioned, that I was way more flippant about it before looking into all this. And I would say, do whatever you want with my body. I don't care. Well, I kind of do care. My body, with all its flaws, and I'm sure I'm going to develop more as I get older and achier and all that lovely stuff, it's still a gift from God. And I want to honor God in my death. So I don't really want you to just stuff me and stick me on the patio. But I got convicted where I'm like, maybe I shouldn't even joke about it, because it is my body God gave me. But we should do what's practical and shows honor to the person who passed away, honor to their memory, honor to their family, and honor to God in whose image they were made. Second thing to keep in mind is, whether you bury the dead or cremate them, don't participate in weird, creepy, new age, occult, pagan stuff. Whether, on the cremation side, you don't take the ashes home, stick them on your mantle, and talk to your dead grandmother every night. That's creepy. That's pagan. That's occult, and you will not hear anything wise or useful. Don't do that. I heard about this new thing that's going on where people would pay to get this certain, like a planter type thing, where you put the ashes in the planter and then you put seeds in there, and then a tree pops up, and then you can commune with your dead family member because they're the tree now. That's gross. That's pagan. Don't do that. Yes, you have a question? Right? No, yeah. Easy answer, no. Where was I at here? Also, the burial side, people get weird and pagan and occult and new agey about burial. I was talking to someone, a Christian person who I love and respect, and I know they love Jesus, and he was telling me, and their whole family loves Jesus, he was telling me about his wife talking to her dead grandmother. And she died years ago, and she'll just be cooking stuff up and go, "Oh, hey, Grandma, what do you think about this recipe?" And I told him, I think you need to talk to her. That's not okay. She's not talking to her dead grandmother. Who do you think she's talking to? Oh, she just, pretends it's her grandma. Demons don't care. They're going to answer her. That's creepy. That's gross. That's a cult. Don't do that. Her grandmother is buried, but she's still talking to her? No, not okay. Or Jesse and I went to John Wesley's tomb in England, and it was so disturbing. There were probably, I don't know, 50 or 100 people there, and the majority of them were going around touching the tomb and like crying over it and rubbing up on it and kissing it. And I'm like, that's gross. That's a cult. That's pagan. Don't do that. So if you cremate, if you bury, be Christian about it. Show honor to God. Show respect to the person who passed away and love to their family. Do what makes practical sense. But don't be pagan, okay? Amen. Amen. Don't be pagan, Sparky. So I think ultimately you're free to follow your conviction on this. If you're like, no, the Bible, I think there's some good evidence on either way. Cremation is okay versus cremation is not okay. Where I personally am at is that I feel like it's okay if it makes practical sense to honor the person and God and all that. If you're like, no, I can't do it. There's too much connotations with other pagan rituals and stuff. Don't do it then. Like I think you follow your conviction on it. Yeah?
I was kind of hitting that along myself because when my mother passed away, I hadn't been used to anything but buried people, and that's all I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
That's all I ever knew, and I thought that was the right thing to do. Well, then my mother passed away, and there was absolutely no way we were going to be able to put a body next to our father. First of all, we didn't have a plot next to our father, and that was her wishes. We didn't have the money to get her body down there. So the cremation thing came up, and I really had problems with that. And I even had some really bad dreams over it all. And I had talked to May, and, she said that same thing as your conclusion basically is that there's not really a command in the Bible to tell us how to bury the dead. But she said that we've got to think about those other incidences. Most of our family members are people that we have die, and either they die because they're old or because of one way or another. We have a body. There are a lot of people that don't have a body. People that were on the Titanic, people that were just recently in the submarine, people that were blown up and buried overseas when they didn't come back from war, or you fall out of the sky, or you were blown up in the space shuttle, or there's things like that. Yeah. Where we have people worried about whether or not we bury them properly because they're not going to make it to heaven, or that kind of thing. She said there's no way that God can relocate the molecules of your body if that's the one that's going to heaven, but there's nothing to say that he doesn't. Everywhere I read is that we're a new creation. Yeah. We're going to have a new body in heaven. Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons why our bodies. I think that's why I don't think God had anything to say about which way we get buried. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right, you guys ready for a second question? Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Question 2. How do you make a critical evaluation without having a critical attitude? This is a good question. Very different from the previous one. How do you make a critical evaluation without having a critical attitude? So to be able to evaluate something critically and make a decision on it, but not have a critical heart, critical spirit, always naysaying everything. All right, so let's look at what criticism means. First, the definition of criticism as defined by dictionary.com. Well, there's 6 different definitions I found. 4 of them were things like literary criticism, textual criticism, stuff like that, kind of unrelated to the topic at hand. But these 2 are related. The act of passing judgment as to the merits of anything. This is okay. This is fine. This you have to do every day. This morning, I hope you passed judgment on the weather before you left your house. And you said, I'll put a coat on. Or I'm not going to wear a hat today because it's not that cold. Hopefully, Thursday, when it was in the 50s, you made a judgment and you said, it's warm. I'm going outside and enjoying this beautiful weather. You pass judgment every day as you're driving, and you see a crazy driver. You go, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to let him do his crazy stuff over there. Or I'm going to speed up around this guy because I don't know what's going on right now. You have to constantly be critical of situations in life. You pass judgment on prices.
If donuts are $2 at Quick Trip and $6 at your local bakery and they taste the same, you go, I'm going to make a critical evaluation and buy the Quick Trip donuts. So we in our culture, we tend to be super hypersensitive about criticism, being critical, and we just assume all judgment is bad, all criticism is bad. No, it's not. When you look at what it really means, there's a level of we have to be critical about certain things. But then the second definition that they give here is the act of passing severe judgment, censure, fault-finding. This sounds to me a lot like nitpicking, where you're never pleased, you're never happy, you're always looking for something to be upset about, always critiquing everything. And okay, that's not cool. We shouldn't live in that place. So how do we do the first and not do the second? And like I mentioned, so we have to think biblically about this. We can't think like Americans about this. And Americans are so hypersensitive about being critical. We lived in Romania for 5 years, and they are not like that. They will tell you exactly what they're thinking, and you have to smile and deal with it. we learn to humble ourselves a lot, and we learn to receive, learn to repent, and not just get upset because somebody criticized us and said something that was true even though it hurt. But in our culture nowadays, we say words are violence. We say everything is racist. Everybody's experiencing microaggressions all the time. Like, what does that even mean? Silence is violence. And words are violence. Everything's violence. Everybody's a victim nowadays. And you go and you talk to someone, and they're ready to be offended. They're ready to feel criticized. They're ready to feel put down and get defensive. And it's like, we have to not think like Americans like this. And you have to think biblically. You have to remove yourself from your culture and even your own sensitivities. It's not easy to get criticized, but it's not necessarily, receiving criticism is not necessarily a bad thing. And being critical, giving criticism is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, we sure would. A lot of people whining and crying, I don't like this Messiah. He's kind of harsh. Is he making a whip again? All right, so being critical is not inherently bad. Stephen in the book of Acts, he spoke very, very critically of the Jews. Acts chapter 7, verse 51, he preaches and says, you stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit. Don't be so critical. Paul was critical of the Galatians. Oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It's like we read that and we're used to reading the Bible and we've read that many times. They're like, oh, that sounds so poetic and nice. No, it's not. You dumb Galatians. Who's put a spell on you, you idiots? That's kind of rude. Even Jesus was critical. He rips the Pharisees all the time. He couldn't just be like, oh, yeah, you nice Pharisees, I just love you and I want to be nice. No, he had to make a stand. He had to call out sin where it was. He had to call out hypocrisy, injustice. He had to be harsh about the Pharisees because they were hurting people and they're twisting the word of God. So he rips the Pharisees. He rebukes his disciples. He calls Peter Satan, effectively. He rebukes him and says, get thee behind me, Satan. And Peter's like, what? I just shared my opinion. You should say, hey, let's discuss that. Let's talk about that. I want to hear your perspective. No, get behind me, Satan. He tells the Laodicean church, I wish you were hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you up, throw you up out of my mouth. It's like, wow. Be a little nicer. John 2, I love John 2, verses 24 and 25. It says that Jesus did not entrust himself to any man because he knew what was in the hearts of men. It's like, he's like, I know you guys. I love you. I'll give my life for you, but I am not totally trusting myself with any of you because you are bad to the core. That's why I came here to die for you. So it's not inherently bad to be critical in and of itself. And going a little further, if we really love someone, we should evaluate them. We have to give critical evaluation of their lives. Proverbs 27, verse 9, oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. If your friend really cares about you, really loves you, they will speak the truth to you. I had an instance of this Friday night. I was with a friend, and he was blaming all of his problems on everybody else in his life. And he's got some major problems with drugs, problems with alcohol, problems at his job. And he's blaming everybody else for all this. And then meanwhile, he tiptoes into church once in a while, a little bit of Bible, a little bit of sin. And he's just going off on all this. And we're riding in the car, and I'm like, what I want to tell him is just knock it off. And just repent. You're blaming everybody else. You need to get your own life right. And I'm like, Lord, I know he won't receive it well because he's got this past and he's got stuff he's dealing with. God, open a door where I can say the truth, but say it in a nice way. And he did. He gave me an opportunity to speak the truth to him in a way that he actually, my friend, really received it. But if you really care about someone, you have to critically evaluate their life, and you have to help them. If you see them doing something that hurts themselves and hurts other people, you are obligated to help them out and speak to them about it. Proverbs 27, verse 6. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. I love the poetry there, that an enemy will give you kisses all the time. They'll love you, they'll shower you with praise, they'll tell you anything that you want to hear because they don't really care about you. And so they'll just give you everything that you want, but they're your enemy. They don't love you, they don't care about you, they don't give a rip about your life. But your friend might wound you, might say something hard and critical, and you're like, ooh, that kind of hurts. He might be harsh, but he does it because he's your friend and he loves you, and those wounds, if you receive it right, are faithful and you're going to grow. It's not easy. It's not easy to receive criticism. It's also not easy to give criticism, especially in our culture, again, where everybody's so ready to snap at you about any little disagreement. It's really hard to put yourself out there and say, man, I love you, but what the what? Stop it. What the what? Brian and I were talking about that a couple weeks ago. We're like, there's a lot of dumb phrases, new phrases that we really don't like, but I'm like, I really like that one. It's like, what you're doing is not even a what the flip, what the heck, what the whatever. It's a what the what. All right. If you really love someone, you will evaluate their life critically, and you will have to criticize them at some points, most likely, unless they're Jesus, then he's good. And Jesus, because he loves you, he evaluates you, and he criticizes you, and he points out stuff. Can you imagine if Jesus never confronted anything in you and just was like, yeah, live however you want, do whatever you want? You wouldn't change. You would be still the same old screwed up, enslaved sinner that you were before you met him. But you go, well, at least I'm going to heaven with my screwed up, awful, possessed life. But, he loves me anyway. No, he looks at our lives. He makes an evaluation. He goes, okay, here's what you need. Let me help you through that. He's not rude about it. Sometimes he's tough. Sometimes he's direct. Sometimes you might get offended by what he says, either directly or through someone else. But he does it because he loves you. But a critical spirit is bad. If you find yourself constantly nitpicking everything, constantly fault-finding, unwilling to be pleased, judging with a wrong heart, judging just to criticize or put someone in their place or show that you're better than them, that's a problem. That's not okay. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. We must criticize. We must make critical evaluations of people's lives, especially, and we have to say something about it, especially if you care about them. If you really love them, you are obligated before God to speak to them. But as you do it, your goal is to build them up. Your goal is not put them down, make yourself look better. I'm the one with all the good ideas. Your goal is you love them, you want to help them, you want to bless them, you want to honor them. And so you're coming humbly as their friend. So how do you do this? How do you make a critical evaluation and really help them out without just having a critical spirit and being negative and poo-pooing everything they're doing? In other words, how do you criticize like Jesus? I have three issues to think about. Number one, you got to make sure your heart is right. Number two, you got to make sure that your evaluation is right. And number three, use wisdom in presenting your evaluation. So number one, make sure your heart is right. Ephesians 4:15 talks about speaking the truth in love. in making a critical evaluation or criticizing someone else, confronting someone about some behavior that needs to be confronted, make sure that your heart is filled with love. That if there's an issue between the two of you, that you've forgiven them, you've repented of anything that you need to repent of, you've apologized if you need to apologize, that you're not angry, you're not bitter, you don't feel rejected, you don't feel hurt, you're not just annoyed at them, but that your heart is good. Your heart toward them is filled with love. 1 Corinthians 13 says that love is patient, it's kind, it's not jealous, it doesn't brag, it's not arrogant, doesn't seek its own, it's not provoked, doesn't hold on to wrongs, it bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. When in making a critical evaluation of someone, your heart must have love in there for that person. Galatians 5:22-23 talks about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. We made a lot of our kids, maybe all of them, I can't remember, memorize that when they were little, and they had this little song that they would do. It's just like ingrained in there. Do you still know the song, Naomi? No, it's gone. No, it's not ingrained in there. All right, we'll do that tonight. We'll practice that tonight when you get home from work. No, I will be sleeping. Are you able to evaluate their life or evaluate the situation critically and still have the fruit of the Spirit, still have love for them, and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? Okay, good. If you're not able to maintain the fruit of the Spirit in it, get your heart right first. Hebrews 11:6 says that without faith, it's impossible to please God. Here's another question. Is your critical evaluation based in faith, or is it based in doubt and unbelief? Like maybe, if you're maybe somebody, you're out doing evangelism with someone, and they're just like dropping the ball left and right. They're barely talking to people, and then when they start to explain the gospel, it's confused and messed up. And so you make a critical evaluation. They suck. Okay, maybe. Let's have some faith. They suck right now, but they can grow. They can get better. They can learn. I watched this video when I was first learning guitar. It was this guy, I don't remember the guy's name. He's got this YouTube channel. He teaches different guitar stuff. He's one of my favorite guitar teachers out there on YouTube. And he's like, the video, you've probably all heard me share this. I don't know. I'll share it again because I like it. But what's that?
Was it Esteban?
No. So the video, it was called something like, if you're a new guitar player, you must watch this video. Best advice you'll ever hear. Something like that. And he starts it out. And he's like, look, I know how it is. You pick up the guitar and you feel like you suck, right? He's like, listen to me. I have the most important word of advice you'll ever hear about that. You feel like you suck because you do. But then he went on. He's like, and you suck because you're just starting out. If you want to not suck, keep going. Keep practicing. Everybody who's amazing at guitar, he lists all these guitar players throughout history. He's like, all of those guys, when they picked up the guitar first, they sucked. He's like, but they kept playing, they kept practicing, and now they don't suck. I watched that. It was like a minute and a half. I'm like, that changed my life. It's like, okay, you make a critical evaluation. Have faith when you do that. Just because the person sucks right now, or because their life is screwed up right now, or they made a mistake, or there's all these issues going on with them, doesn't mean that that's where Jesus wants to leave them. And approach it with faith that, okay, yeah, you're screwed up right now. Yeah, yesterday you screwed up too. Yeah, the day before. Yeah, and okay, I think about it, it's been a lot. But I still have faith in God. Losing my faith in you, but I got faith in God, and I know you love him. So make sure you got faith in making that critical evaluation. And Peter told the believers in 1 Peter 3:8 that they should walk in unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Are you judging and making a critical evaluation out of a feeling of superiority to put them down? Or is it out of a humble heart and a spirit of unity that you want to come alongside them, build them up, and see them in a better place? So number one is make sure your heart is right. Number two, make sure that your evaluation is right. Don't evaluate harshly or quickly, but weigh the evidence. Don't just make a split-second decision. I know that this, I don't remember where I heard this, or maybe I just thought of it. Oh yeah, I was just remembering, like, as a kid, my parents doing that. And I've asked my kids about it too, like how they feel about it. And that sucks when your dad comes home and he sees you with the cookie jar and there's no cookies in there, and he goes, "You've been stealing cookies from the cookie jar, straight to your room, you're bad." And then you try to explain, "No, I took it from my little brother because he was stealing cookies. I tried to take it away from him. You just happened to walk right in while I had the cookie jar." That might be entirely true, but now you take the blame because your dad came home, caught you with the cookies, and he makes a split-second decision. Boom, I've evaluated it. You're naughty. Go to your room. I've been the victim of that, and I'm sure all of you have, and my kids have told me that's the most awful feeling ever when me or Jesse blame them for something they didn't do because we make way too quick judgment on it. When you're going to evaluate someone and criticize them, make sure your evaluation is right. Don't just jump into it quickly. Don't be harsh about it, but evaluate it. Look at the evidence. Get different angles on it. Don't just hear one perspective or come with your perspective without even looking at the evidence, but weigh the evidence so you can make a correct decision about it. There's nothing worse than just being unjustly criticized. If someone criticizes you and they're correct, and they've weighed the evidence, and they've thought through it all, that's a lot easier to handle. I mean, criticism's never easy to receive. But at least if they're correct in their criticism, it's a lot easier to handle than a wrong criticism or a quickly given judgment. Proverbs 18, verse 13 says, "If one gives an answer before he hears it, it is his folly and shame." Man, we do that all the time. We hear just a little tidbit about something, and we go, "Oh, they're bad. Oh, they're ruined. They'll never change." Like, look at all the evidence. Wait till you reserve judgment till you see what's totally, happened there. Like, there's a lot of people now, I think all of you have heard about IHOP and Mike Bickle and what's gone down there, allegations of adultery and immorality. And I don't know. I'm not ready to throw out Mike Bickle and IHOP yet. I know people who, as soon as the allegations were heard, they said, "I'll never listen to that ministry again. I'll never go to their website. I'll never go to the prayer room. I'll never listen to Misty Edwards again because she was one of their worship leaders, and I'm never going to give them anything anymore. I'm never going to give them any part of my heart anymore." Hold on. Wait till the evidence comes out. Wait till we know what actually happened and we hear from all the people. Don't be quick to make a judgment. Make sure your evaluation is right. And the second part of that is judge justly, not unjustly. Proverbs 31:9 says, "Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." We are commanded, we are told to judge. But when you judge, judge correctly. Judge with righteousness. Judge with a right heart, and judge truthfully. Romans 2:1 warns us of judging someone else for the same thing that we're doing. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be perfect before you can offer an evaluation of someone else. Like, I paint houses on the side with Jonathan. And there are a lot of houses that I painted that all of, me, Jonathan, and Logan painting the houses, we're like, "Man, this house is built so poorly." And it's obvious because the paint keeps peeling off, because it doesn't have the proper insulation, so moisture's getting through, or something's going on, that the builders built it poorly, and we just know. So I can make a critical evaluation. Those builders did a terrible job. Now, if I was also going around and I'm building houses poorly, keep that in perspective. I could make an evaluation. Okay, this house is poorly built, but also I'm screwing up. But their house is bad too. So that's kind of what Paul is saying here. Like, okay, just keep it in perspective. It doesn't mean you have to have everything figured out before you can criticize a poorly built house, that you have to build a house perfectly. He's not saying that, but he's saying if you're doing the same stuff, keep that in perspective. You can still make an evaluation, but be humble about it. So make sure your heart is right. Also, do your due diligence to make sure that your evaluation is right, as best as you can anyway. And then the third part, use wisdom in presenting your evaluation. So if you've got a right heart and you make sure, as far as you can tell, this is the right evaluation. That goes a long way to making your evaluation receptive, making it easier for the person to receive your criticism. They could still get upset and get offended because they just want to get offended. So then there's a third step of, okay, make sure that you do your best to present it with wisdom. Again, they could still get offended just because they want to get offended, and people like to be offended and blame their problems on others. But you need to do your work to make sure that you do the best you can to have your heart right, know the situation right, and then present it with wisdom. Proverbs 15:2, the New American Standard Version, says, "The tongue of the wise makes knowledge pleasant, but the mouth of fools spouts foolishness." The New Living Translation says it this way, that the tongue of the wise makes knowledge appealing. That's what we want. You make your critical evaluation, you want to help the person. You don't want them to just get upset and offended, run away, mad, never talk to you again. You really care about them. You want them to change. And so that's the third step is, I need your wisdom, God. How do I share this in a way that they will receive it and not just blow me off? It's possible, but it's hard. 2 Timothy 2:15, Paul writes, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth." You can find, if you go online and search about any big ministry, IHOP, Bethel in Redding, California, Saddleback Church, you just go on Google and you type that in, you're going to find half the websites will love them, and half the websites will hate them. And they'll say, Bethel Church is a cult. Rick Warren is a cult leader. IHOP is from the devil. You can find all these people that are self-proclaimed watchdogs, Christian watchdogs, that are here to call out sin. And they'll use this verse a lot of times to say the worker, that you need to rightly handle the word of truth. And they'll take that and they'll say that means that our job is to know the word of truth, and then we can use it like a hammer to smash everything that's a lie. I don't think that's the heart of what Paul is getting at with this verse. He says, rightly handle the word of truth. Know the truth, but know how to handle it. Know how to deliver the truth. And Jesus was amazing at that. He knew when someone came to him with a question, he knew, okay, do I confront this directly, or do I just ignore the question and I come up, tell a cool story that will kind of get at the heart of the matter and it'll actually lodge in there? Or, they got a question and he knows, do I treat them with gentleness and answer their question, or do I rebuke them because they need a rebuke right now and they got a wrong heart? We need that. We need that wisdom from God, where we make the critical evaluation. We have a right heart. We've done our due diligence to make sure this is, as far as I can tell, this is the truth of what's going on. And then we need the wisdom to present it in a way that it's received well. Now, we could, and just as a disclaimer, you could go through all those steps, and still, you're not going to be received well. Someone still could get offended. Maybe they didn't get enough sleep last night, or they had a bad day at work, and they're just ready to get offended about everything. Watched a video of this 16-year-old girl. Her parents gave her a brand new Tesla. And she sees it and she's like, I don't want a Tesla. I wanted a Mercedes. It's okay, I'll take the Tesla. Someone could do everything right, trying to help you, and you still get offended just because you want to get offended. But it's called being a parent. Is that what you said? Yeah. But those are three guidelines that I think we can grab a hold of. One is make sure that your heart is right. 2, make sure your evaluation is right. And then pray for wisdom. Ask God how to share this evaluation so that it can be received in the best way possible. That way you guard your heart, and then you have a better chance, anyway, of your evaluation being received. All right. Make sense? All good? Yeah. Cool. It's 12 o'clock. Let's pray. Lord, thank you. Thank you for the Word of God. That is the source of all truth. And Lord, thank you for critically evaluating us and not allowing us to stay with wrong ideas, with a wrong heart, with wrong actions, wrong behaviors. Lord, thank you that you deliver us out of that and that you point at problems in our lives because you love us and then we can change, and you give us your grace to change. Father, I pray for us as a church that we would walk not with a critical spirit, not with a critical heart, critical attitude, but that we would walk in love toward one another and humility toward one another, but also love each other enough to criticize when it's needed in order to build one another up and see each other look more and more like you, Jesus. And I pray that your blessing would be upon us and that we would go out and be a light to a world that desperately needs you. In Jesus' name.